Picture this for a second. A really simple, twisted piece of metal.
Just a regular wire.
Right, just wire. It's inexpensive. It's totally unassuming. And yet, sitting right there on a basic wooden post, it completely reshaped the physical and the political landscape of our entire world.
Yeah, you see it driving down the highway, maybe stretching for miles along the roadside, and it just kind of blends right into the background.
Exactly.
It's one of those invisible forces of history. You really rarely stop to think about the sheer impact those little twisted points of steel have actually had on human civilization.
Which is exactly why we're bringing this to the table for you today.
Oh.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. We have gathered a massive amount of historical documentation, design schematics, global impact studies, all of it centered entirely on barbed wire.
The humble barbed wire.
The humble barbed wire. And our mission today is to take you on a journey, exploring how this really basic agricultural tool went from a random idea tinkered with in a farmhouse to a global symbol of both private property and severe oppression.
Yeah.
We're basically doing all the heavy lifting to save you the time of digging through all that dense historical text yourself.
Because there is a lot of it.
There's so much, so we're really glad you're here. Let's just jump right in.
To really understand why this invention hit the world like a lightning bolt, we really have to look at the landscape of the American westward expansion. Specifically, right before barbed wire existed.
Right.
You have railroads expanding at just a breakneck pace. And you have farmers pushing out into the plains who desperately need to keep free-ranging livestock out of their crops.
And the scale of that problem, I mean, it's really hard to wrap your head around today. But imagine trying to protect thousands of acres of wheat from massive herds of wandering cattle. And your only traditional fencing materials are wood and stone.
Out in the vast, treeless, rocky plains.
Yeah, it's a total logistical nightmare.
It was an entirely unsustainable business model. I mean, look at the very first farmers in the Fresno, California area around 1872. They spent nearly $4,000 on lumber just to protect 2,500 acres.
Wait, $4,000? In
Yeah.
1872?
Yeah. In modern money, so for the year 2025, that's equivalent to about $108,000
Oh,
just to build a basic wooden perimeter.
that is just staggering. A farmer can't absorb that kind of overhead just to keep cows away. But
Yeah.
surely they tried other methods before resigning themselves to, bankruptcy by lumber.
They did try. The primary alternative was planting a biological fence. It was a plant called Osage orange.
Okay.
It's this intensely thorny bush, but the problem is, to make a functional fence out of it, you have to transplant thousands of these individual bushes. Then you have to wait years for them to grow thick enough to actually stop a 1,000-pound animal.
Right.
And you just have to cross your fingers that the rain-starved, dusty soils out on the plains won't just kill the plants outright.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because when you have an entire agricultural industry facing what is essentially a billion-dollar problem, it usually triggers a frantic race for a practical solution.
Yeah.
And that race really hits a boiling point around 1873.
Yeah, at a county fair in DeKalb, Illinois.
Of all places.
Right. That year, you have this meeting of minds. The major players who would eventually become known as the Big Four of the barbed wire industry were all just wandering this fair.
Just attending the fair.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Joseph Glidden, Jacob Haish, Charles Francis Washburn, and Isaac L. Elwood. They all happened to see a display by a man named Henry B. Rose. He had recently patented something he called the wooden strip with metallic points.
Which, just based on the name alone, sounds incredibly rudimentary.
Oh, it was. It was literally just a wooden block with wire protrusions attached to it. You were meant to hang it on a smooth wire fence to just prick any cow that leaned on it. But that really simple mechanism sparked an idea in Joseph Glidden. He went home from that fair and just started experimenting with wire. And the way he solved the manufacturing puzzle is frankly brilliant.
Tell him how he did it.
He realized he needed a way to hold the sharp metallic barbs perfectly in place without them sliding up and down the wire. To figure out the twisting mechanism, he actually used his own home coffee mill.
Wait, you mean the little hand crank machine you used to grind roasted coffee beans in the kitchen?
The exact same one. He used the internal grinding mechanism of the coffee mill to figure out how to uniformly twist two long strands of wire together, and that locked the sharp barbs tightly into place right between the twists.
That is unbelievable.
That little kitchen experiment led directly to his 1874 patent, which he boldly named the winner.
A kitchen appliance basically birthed the modern agricultural perimeter.
Yeah. Lucien B. Smith had actually patented a very basic version of barbed wire earlier, in 1867, but Glidden's coffee mill modifications are what made it durable, mass-producible, and effective. It was the modern invention we recognize today.
I have to imagine, though, that showing up with a spool of sharp, dangerous-looking metal didn't immediately win over everyone on the frontier. I mean, the farmers might have wanted it, but ranchers were entirely accustomed to the open range.
What's fascinating here is how the product required a masterful psychological approach to sales. Down in Texas, folks were highly skeptical.
Oh, I bet.
Open-range ranchers absolutely hated the concept of enclosed land. Plus, they were terrified this new wire would just tear their valuable cattle to shreds. And there was also this deep, lingering political suspicion that northern industrialists were just trying to exploit the South.
So how do you convince an angry, skeptical crowd of Texas ranchers to buy into this?
You bring in a showman.
Ah,
In 1876, a salesman named John Warren Gates takes the wire down to the Military Plaza in San Antonio, Texas. He doesn't just pass out pamphlets. He sets up a massive public demonstration right in the middle of the plaza.
right in the open.
He builds a corral out of the barbed wire, drives a herd of really aggressive Texas Longhorn cattle inside, and just lets the crowd watch.
Let me guess. The cattle charge the wire, get a prick from the barbs, and back off.
Precisely. It safely and effectively contained the animals without slaughtering them. The visual proof was completely undeniable. The demonstration was such a massive success that Gates actually had to retreat to the nearby Menger Hotel just to process the flood of orders.
Wow.
The industry just exploded. Between 1873 and 1899, there were up to 150 different companies manufacturing variations of this wire.
And as with any massive industrial boom, the big fish eventually eat the small fish.
Always.
John Warren Gates realized the power he held, parted ways with his initial partners, and created a massive monopoly called American Steel and Wire. He utilized total vertical integration. That means his company controlled everything from mining the iron ore to drawing the steel rods, all the way to twisting the final barbed wire.
A total monopoly.
Yeah, exactly. It became a colossal corporate empire that was later absorbed into U.S. Steel.
But the business history is really only half the story here. To really appreciate how this product changed the physical landscape, we have to look closely at the engineering. Because putting up a barbed wire fence is not just unrolling a spool and nailing it to a tree. It is an intricate exercise in physics.
Because you're dealing with a staggering amount of force. A properly installed barbed wire fence is stretched under up to half a ton of tension.
Half a ton.
That's 1,000 pounds of pull trying to snap that wire back.
Which means the most critical component of the entire fence is the corner post. Its sole function is to resist that massive tension. If a corner post fails, the whole fence collapses. You can't just stick a log in the mud.
No.
You need a primary post. And then about 8 feet away, you place a brace post. You connect those two with a horizontal compression brace and then run diagonal wires between them, twisting them tight to form a solid, immovable assembly.
It's an entire structure.
Yeah, and for really long stretches of fence, you actually need double braces built into the line just to keep the tension stable.
And the wire itself has to be engineered to survive the elements for decades. For standard agriculture, you're generally looking at double-strand, zinc-coated galvanized steel.
And that galvanization process is key. It basically means giving the steel wire a bath in molten zinc. The zinc acts as a sacrificial armor, so the elements eat away at the zinc coating instead of rusting the steel underneath.
So it extends the life of the fence.
Dramatically. If you buy a Class I coating, which is a lighter dip, it'll start to rust in about 8 to 10 years. But if you spring for the heavy-duty Class III coating, you get 15 to 20 years of rust protection.
Then you have to actually attach it to that massive corner post. You wrap it around and tie it off using a specific knot called a timber hitch, which is fascinating because that specific knot actually holds under tension much better with stiff wire than it does with flexible rope.
Then you just stretch it tight. The line posts you see every 10 or 15 feet in between the corners. They aren't there to take up slack or pull the wire. Their only job is simply to keep the evenly spaced strands suspended off the ground.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this brilliant feat of engineering, designed to save farmers money, brought about massive, sweeping, unintended consequences.
Yeah.
The most immediate being the dramatic sudden end of the American cowboy era.
Herding thousands of cattle across the open plains required an army of men. You needed cowboys to track the herds, catch strays, drive them to market. But once barbed wire provided this incredibly cheap, permanent method to enclose land and control movement, that vast manpower was obsolete.
It just wasn't needed.
Right. Historians frequently point to the widespread adoption of barbed wire as the literal endpoint of the Old West.
But closing the open range wasn't just an economic shift for ranch hands. It triggered an absolute catastrophe in the 1880s known as the Big Die-Up.
It is a truly grim chapter of history. Cattle rely heavily on instinctual migration patterns for survival. When brutal blizzard conditions hit the northern plains, the herds naturally turn their backs to the wind and migrate toward the warmer southern plains.
That's just what they do.
Exactly. But by the early 1880s, ranchers in the Texas Panhandle had aggressively fenced off their claims. They knew the sparse winter grass on their land couldn't support extra grazing from northern cattle, so they built miles of barbed wire to physically block the migration paths.
You really have to imagine the sheer horror of that scenario. Massive herds of cattle, freezing and exhausted, blindly walking south through blinding snowstorms, only to suddenly hit an endless, immovable wall of sharp wire.
Yeah.
During the particularly brutal winter of 1885, up to three-quarters of some of these herds either froze to death or starved right there, piled up against the fence lines.
And the fallout from that mass death was explosive. Smaller cattlemen, particularly down in central Texas, were desperate. Their herds were dying, they had no access to water or grazing land, so they took matters into their own hands and started cutting the fences.
Which erupted into what became known as the fence-cutting wars.
It was complete chaos on the frontier. You had midnight raids with wire cutters, vigilante justice, and outright range wars between the farmers defending their perimeters and the open range ranchers trying to keep their livelihoods alive.
People were actually dying in shootouts over this wire.
It escalated to the point where the state government had to step in. In 1884, Texas passed a law making fence cutting a felony offense, which effectively ended the violence and legally settled the American frontier in favor of private property.
But the story doesn't stop at the frontier.
No. If we connect this to the bigger picture, you start to see a very dark, chilling evolution. A tool that was explicitly designed, refined, and perfected to control the movement of animals was very rapidly adapted to control the movement of human beings.
It didn't take long for global militaries to recognize the potential of an impassable, razor-sharp barrier. The first recorded combat use of barbed wire was actually by Portuguese troops defending against African tribes during the Combat of Magul in 1895.
And by 1899, it was being deployed extensively in the Boer War. But it wasn't just being used to protect military outposts from charges. It was used strategically to control vast spaces of land and, significantly, to hold the captured Boer population inside concentration camps.
As the timeline pushes into the 20th century, we see this wire increasingly defining international borders and urban unrest. Looking at the U.S.-Mexico border, the government built its first international fence along the California line from 1909 to 1911.
But that was initially just to keep cattle from wandering between the countries.
Right, cattle. But by 1924, the newly established Border Patrol began building more barbed wire fences, this time specifically to prevent people from crossing. Decades later, during the 1968 Chicago riots, authorities actually attached barbed wire frames to the front of police and National Guard vehicles to drive directly into crowds of protesters. They earned the nickname Daily Dozers after the city's mayor.
But the most devastating, world-altering application of barbed wire in human warfare was undoubtedly World War I.
The trench warfare of the Western Front.
The endless entanglements placed in front of the trenches completely paralyzed troop movement. It trapped men in no man's land, slowing their advance to a crawl and making them incredibly vulnerable to the relentless machine guns and artillery.
The environment was a muddy, chaotic hellscape, and the wire technology had to adapt to it. Think about the logistics. You can't exactly stand up in the middle of no man's land under the light of a flare with a heavy hammer pounding wooden posts into the ground to build a fence.
You'd be shot instantly.
Instantly. So military engineers invented the screw picket. It was a heavy metal rod with eyelets for stringing the wire, but the bottom was shaped like a corkscrew.
That's really clever.
It allowed soldiers to sneak out into the mud under the cover of darkness and silently twist the pickets directly into the ground without making a sound.
The psychological terror of encountering that wire in the dark is hard to overstate. There is a visceral account from a British writer describing the specific horror of the German defenses. He noted that while the British wire was galvanized, giving it that zinc armor we talked about earlier, which faded to a dull, low-visibility gray, the German wire was not galvanized.
So it rusted.
It rusted to this menacing, highly visible black color, and the construction was brutal. He described the German wire as being thick as a sailor's heavy rigging rope, with 16 barbs packed into every single foot.
16 bars per foot. You can't even grab that. It's essentially a continuous rusted blade of metal.
And this grim legacy of human containment carried right into World War II. During the internment of Japanese Americans, the United States utilized barbed wire perimeters to enclose massive camps like Manzanar. Across the Atlantic, the Nazis integrated barbed wire directly into the sinister architecture of their concentration and extermination camps, such as Auschwitz.
The perimeter fences weren't just physical barriers there.
No, they were heavily electrified to prevent any chance of escape. In the specific extermination areas of these camps, guards would sometimes meticulously braid the barbed wire with tree branches to camouflage the fences and hide the atrocities from outsiders. Through these systematic, horrific applications, barbed wire permanently transitioned from a simple agricultural convenience into a universal symbol of oppression and the outright denial of human freedom.
It's deeply ingrained now.
It's the reason Amnesty International prominently features a barbed wire wrapped around a candle in their logo, and why the oppressive East German border regime was commonly referred to simply as wall and barbed wire.
It is a really heavy history to process.
It truly is. The human cost associated with this invention is immense.
So what does this all mean? When we step back from that heavy historical context, how do we interact with this invention now, in the modern era, knowing all of this? From a pure safety and navigation perspective, humans have largely figured out how to bypass it. If you're careful, you can stretch the gaps, wear thick protective clothing, or if you're dealing with the modern high-security variant like razor wire, you can throw a thick carpet over it or use heavy-duty wire cutters.
But wildlife doesn't have the luxury of wire cutters or thick carpets. Today, the sheer volume of injuries caused by barbed wire is primarily seen in the animal kingdom, and the reactions vary drastically by species.
How so?
Well, grazing animals like cows and sheep are generally slow-moving. When they press against a wire and feel the sharp pain of the barb, their instinct is to back away. But horses are entirely different.
Because they're flight animals.
Exactly. When a horse gets spooked or entangled and feels that sharp prick, it doesn't back up. It panics and tries to violently pull away or run through it. When a 1,000-pound horse thrashes against tightly stretched barbed wire, the barbs act like hooks.
Oh.
They tear off massive patches of skin, which often leads to severe career-ending disabilities or fatal infections.
It's also a silent, invisible killer for nocturnal animals. Birds, owls, bats, they simply cannot perceive those thin metallic strands while they're flying at speed in the dark. The impact on local ecosystems is actually such a significant issue that it prompted major international legislation.
Yeah, in Norway.
Right. In 2010, the country of Norway took a definitive stand and completely banned the use of any new barbed wire fences aimed at limiting animal migration. They now require farmers to utilize electric fences instead, which provide a warning shock without the physical laceration.
Which leads to an incredibly surprising, highly lucrative modern consequence that reaches far beyond the borders of Norwegian farms. Because those northern cattle are no longer grazing in fields surrounded by sharp barbs, their hides are virtually pristine.
Right.
They don't have the deep scratches, scuffs, and healed scars that you find on cattle raised in the American West.
And this is something I had absolutely no idea about. How does a pristine cow hide from Norway impact the global market?
It dictates the supply chain for ultra-luxury automobiles. Automakers, specifically top-tier brands like Bentley and Rolls-Royce, demand absolute perfection for the interiors of their vehicles. They source their leather specifically from Norwegian and Northern European cattle, precisely because the absence of barbed wire in those regions guarantees a flawless hide.
That is the most mind-blowing butterfly effect. A local environmental policy change designed to protect flying bats and panicked horses ends up defining the meticulous supply chain for a $500,000 luxury car.
It really highlights how deeply intertwined this simple invention is with modern commerce.
And I can't let us wrap up without bringing up one quick, highly unexpected cultural note. Beyond farming, beyond borders, and beyond luxury cars, barbed wire also found a bizarre home in the theatrical world of hardcore professional wrestling.
Oh, right.
Legendary wrestlers like Mick Foley famously utilized baseball bats, heavily wrapped in barbed wire during their matches. It just perfectly encapsulates how deeply embedded that specific imagery of extreme danger and toughness is in our collective culture.
It's an instantly recognizable shorthand for danger. Whether you're looking at the plains of the American West, the muddy trenches of Europe, the supply chains of luxury cars, or the center of a wrestling ring.
It's been quite a journey today. We have traced how a simple length of twisted wire, an idea that quite literally took physical shape inside a farmer's kitchen coffee mill, managed to completely transform global agriculture. It corralled the livestock, it ended the romanticized era of the American cowboy, and it drew the hard, unforgiving lines of private property across the frontier.
And simultaneously, it defined modern military history. It became a devastating tool for unimaginable oppression, paralyzing armies in the mud of no man's land, while continuing to serve as a physical, psychological barrier that has shaped international borders and security for over a century.
But before we let you go, there's one final detail from our deep dive that really stuck out. We want to leave you with this thought to chew on.
Earlier, we talked about all the ways barbed wire has been used to divide us, to keep cattle in, to keep enemies out, to build walls between nations. But around the turn of the 20th century, in some rural areas, farmers actually used the metal strands of their barbed wire fences as local telephone networks.
That's wild.
Imagine that. The very same sharp, dangerous tool designed to isolate people and divide the land was simultaneously acting as the physical wiring that connected isolated voices together in conversation. It makes you wonder what other tools in our world designed for division might have a hidden potential for connection.
That is a fascinating question to mull over. Thank you so much for joining us at the table for this deep dive. We hope it gave you a completely new perspective on something you probably drive past every single day without a second thought. Keep questioning the world around you, and we warmly invite you back for our next exploration. See you then.